You said this is the first volume of the tetralogy.
Yes.
Are the others in similar forms to this? Or?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's a 4 volumes are a continuation of
Same characters?
same characters, going through the same motions, sometimes saying some of the same thing. It's very much like Proust, I think, that all of the psychic energy of the 4 novels, like is in the first novel. Like everything, all the psychic energy in Proust is in Swann's Way. And then the rest of the series of novels is sort of withdrawing out of that. And then in the last novel, the time recaptured in Proust, and also here, there's a slight uptick in the thing. But it's somehow, if we only had Swann's Way, I think we would have this essential Proust, and I think if we only had this, we would have the essential Meier. I think one of the things that perhaps gets in the way of the other volumes of the trilogy is the fact that there is no structure, and so that the memories keep on recycling, repeating, and extending, and filling in as you go through, as the past is remembered. And then Bauer dies eventually in the 3rd volume after the passage of time. And and then in the last volume, Binchadler visits his widow in Amrain, and it's very clear that Binchadler is going to write the book, that Bauer never gets around to writing his book. So Binchadler is going to write it for him and about him, which is rather neat. It's a great idea for an autobiography, because you just pour your life into 2 different characters and let them interact your life. And you step in the background. It's quite ingenious. But Meier, I think, as Kosselschaf indicated, Meier was an extremely astute and canny and savvy and very well informed writer. One of his favorite writers was William Carlos Williams, for example. And he says in one of the interviews, he says to the interviewer, that I noticed in William Carlos Williams how gloriously the unbeautiful, the unaesthetic, the ordinary, the small can shine forth when it is placed against the right background. I'm a little in love with these discordant phenomena. I have never been interested in aestheticism understood as the merely beautiful, the select, the dressed up. And as a matter of fact, while he's answering the question, he pulls out a poem of William Carlos Williams and reads it to the interviewer. For me, the aesthetic is anchored much more deeply, connected with the completely immaterial and with the movingly small, the eccentric, the vulnerable, the susceptible, the inconspicuous. That's why I like Williams so much, but not only because he illuminates this work. In art, it's not just a matter of the motif of what is represented, but above all, it is the sound. We should confess that we really comprehend little, understand little, and that we are dependent on intimations and traces in order to find our place in the world. Reason alone won't carry us through and often leads us astray. My understanding of art or literature includes the knowledge that art, for example a novel, is first and last an art product, that art has to do and should have to do with art, that art cannot be a pale imitation but remains in contact with life, must in some sense serve life. That's what makes art so provoking and paradoxical. On the one hand, it is artificial. On the other hand, it interests us only when it relates to creation, to life, to human life, to individual people. And what might almost be his, I don't quite know what to call it, the summing up of his whole attitude towards art, life, and so forth. The interviewer says, you say in Isle of the Dead that the right to happiness would be a meager utopia. Freud said that man's goal of happiness is not contained in the plan of creation. Meier replies, I don't know Freud's sentence, but I am most deeply convinced that we have a right to nothing. We have perhaps the grace of encountering or the grace of becoming part of something. Of course, that sounds rather pious and discordant to many people's ears, but I am convinced that we are not the ladies and gentlemen that we always try to present ourselves as, but are bound up with creation the way the swallow, the daisy, or the cherry tree are. That is where we belong, and we can be happy we belong there. We belong there and cannot make an exception of ourselves. The daisy takes its life as it is given. The swallow makes its flights, brings up young, and chases mosquitoes in the evening against the sky. The right to happiness or self-realization would never occur to them in their dreams. That should also be true of us. Of course, we are rather privileged, but we belong to the great whole. And when we accept that, we do not endanger the great whole. But when we arrogate to ourselves something to which we have no right, we endanger the basic principles of our life, as we have very clearly done in recent decades. Well, I don't know how you sort of respond. I mean, those of you who haven't read this book, but who are hearing this, to this writer, this kind of writing, which is certainly totally unexpected, I think, for pretty much all of us. Yes?
I'm curious because I'm listening to you read it and reading it. It's wonderful. I have a sense, with starting in the basement where I don't read the original language, that you have captured this sound and essence of this writer. And I cannot understand for the life of me how translation is possible. And when you're in the midst of figuring out a sentence, for instance, how you find that sound, or what I'm very curious about the process.
Well, it's a matter, I mean, translators work quite differently, of course, and for me, I always start with the rhythm of the original. The rhythm of the sentences, and it's one of the reasons I object to a recent translation of Proust is because it's a very clinical translation in which every word is exactly the right word, but the translator has no sense of Proust's sentences. And Proust's sentences, these long, sagging rhythms, phrases that go on, and they don't stop, and your voice has to go on and on. So if you chop it into individual words, the essence of it somehow disappears. And so you start with the sound, and or I start with the sound. A lot of people will have different ways of doing it. And then it's a matter of finding the words that fit the sound. Meier himself talks about sound as being essential to what he's doing in his writing. And so I wanted it to sound in English the way it sounds in German. And I think it does. Again, there's a kind of Berlin Wall between any two languages because they're not exactly congruent. And English is a ruthlessly concrete language. Enormous vocabulary, everything has its own name. And other languages have much smaller vocabularies, and they tend to use a single word in many different ways. Whereas English, everything has its own name, and it has to do with the history of English, England, and English language, of course. So it's in German, not in Meier's case, because his writing is very musical, the way that Proust is very musical, and so that I think was easier than it would have been to translate some other writer who wasn't so musical. But the music was really an essential part.
Yes. Actually, I'd like to say, having read both in German and in literalization, one thing that should be said as well is, besides your capturing rhythm, you do also stay very, very, very close to the German. Because it almost sounded, as you're presenting it now, that maybe you've been creative and just following rhythms, but you did tend to stay very close to the German as well, right? It is like a tightrope
Yes.
between rhythms and then closeness and hitting the word
Yes,
on the head.
and some translations, especially where the original is imponderable, then becomes an adaptation where you simply take the subject and the general approach and then recast it into English. But to actually translate the words is, but I always try to stay very close to English, but it's frequently not possible. With Meier, it wasn't so difficult. It was a matter of figuring out the thought that was in this very strange prose to which neither we nor the Germans are really accustomed. And so that was the problem.
It was very successful, I think. I mean, it really, and as you say, I think also in very, very unusual in German and very, very unusual in English. So that was yes.
I would just say for anybody who hasn't read it, that a really nice way to just read it out loud to yourself. It's okay to leave your house. Because it works so beautifully.
Well, it was I had the feeling myself that it was very difficult when I was choosing things to read here, very difficult to read it at the beginning. Whereas if you read it on the page, you can hear the characters talking. But when you then start to read it, or when I started to read it with the idea of reading it to a group, I found it very hard to get hold of the rhythm of speaking, because the sentences just go and go and go and go, and that made it sort of very, very difficult to do. But I think, by the way, that's probably a test of any really good writer, that they can be read out loud and it sounds good. And because it shows that the writer is aware of the sonic level of the speech.
You said in your introduction, you're talking about the spiral nature of this. I wonder if you comment on the structure of the book. I mean, the three sisters keep appearing. The sharpening of the cherry trees appear over and over again. These things keep recurring. And I have to confess that as I was reading this, I mean, a certain tedium sets in. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's like one damn thing after another. And we talked about this principle of construction.
Yes, okay, this is very interesting. By the way, it baffled me for quite a while when I first got the book to translate, and I read the first few pages. I didn't know what was going on here. But it's very much in the form of a ballad. The repetitions, once you get used to them, they slowly begin to accrete in terms of the repetitions. I mean, the cherry tree is perhaps the best example of this. That you read it and it's called up every 10 pages or so in reference to the cherry tree. And each time it's mentioned, sometimes in the same words, sometimes in slightly varied words. Each time it's mentioned, it grows in import somehow. And so that it's sort of like I suppose, a painter starting out with a blank canvas and doing a plan with charcoal or something, and then starting to put on the paint and putting on layer after layer of paint. It sort of works that way if you let it work that way. I think it. I mean, we're so used to picking up a book and reading it. And this is a book that you pick up and, first of all, you're not quite sure how to read it. But then you just sort of let yourself go and just follow its rhythms, and then it begins to pick you up. And so it becomes quite moving, and it's not at all sentimental. It's a very clear-eyed presentation of the ineffable, of the mysteries that Flannery O'Connor spoke about. And what he liked about Williams, of course, was that Williams writes about these ordinary objects. Williams' great motto was "no ideas but in things." And the idea that the things are all that we have in life, but the mystery has to somehow be incorporated in things, and that Williams found a way to do this much of the time. And that attracted Meier to him. So that kind of thing. And as he says, he doesn't want art to be just art, and art will have to do with life, and it has to do with the small things in life. with everyday occurrences, everyday habits, not with wars and all that sort of thing. Because that wonderful bit about the bronze horse, the great sounds of human destiny, trumpets and battles and so forth, that what we were writing about. So there's a very, it's a very strange man. I also, a Swiss colleague at the University of Basel, sort of spent an afternoon with Meier in his little town, Niederbipp, and said he's exactly the way he is in the book. He's exactly like that, wonderful person, and very articulate and very warm and very welcoming. But there's an absence of pretension about what he's writing about. And you think of Proust, I'm just saying this by way of illustration, Proust, who is so dedicated to high French society, which he despises, and writes about that from the outside and so forth. And Meier is very inclusive. He wants to include all the things going on in life, all these strange things, like the wood carving of the trout, Eve stroking the trout, and all these things which are really wonderful when you think of them in this way. But ordinarily, you wouldn't. I mean, if you walk into that little museum and look at these things, you think, what is this? It's a big pile of every possible kind of art. But for him, it's invested with meaning. All these small things are invested with meaning. And I think if you just relax when you read the book and just flow with it, that this begins to accumulate, I would say, as you go through it. And by the way, if you translate a book, you really get to read the book. So you have to figure all of this out.
I have two questions. What social class do these two guys belong to?
Well, that's a good question, actually. They were friends in the army, and by the way, I was doing my introduction, I was going to have a long thing about the Swiss army, because, they're on maneuvers in here. The Swiss army, I think, Catherine can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think every able-bodied male has to be in the Swiss army forever. And so once you've got your training, then every Sunday for the rest of your life together, you go out and practice shooting. And if you're in Switzerland on Sunday, it's amazing. The whole country, all you hear is shots being fired in every direction. The people are doing this thing. And in the second novel, he gets fascinated by Borodino, by Tolstoy's War and Peace, and the Battle of Borodino. And you have sort of the idea that this is somehow the German army, but it has nothing to do with the German army. Switzerland, of course, was neutral during the war, and the Swiss didn't want to have anything to do with the Germans anyway, particularly. So it's the Swiss army on these maneuvers that is going on. So they would seem to be I think I have an answer. Bauer says at one point that both he and Binchayler are railroad men when they're looking at a locomotive. And so they somehow worked for the railroad. It's never mentioned again. So that would make them working class. Mm-hmm. And Bauer is, Meier is really fascinated with things like factories and old factories and ugly factories.
So he worked in one himself?
Yes, he worked in a lamp factory, and I think I could be its manager at a certain point.
The other question is, it's called Isle of the Dead, a novel by Gerhard Meier. Mm-hmm. And is it a novel? I mean, it's a novel notion of a novel.
well, of course. But
what else could it be? But yet one has a sense that it stretches the concept of a novel.
Well, yes, it does, but I mean, then so does Proust, and so does Musil, so does
Yeah, I guess
Kafka, and so forth. And a novel, of course, is a kind of catch-all category for all sorts of prose that nobody knows what else to do with it.
But it could have just said Isle of the Dead by Gerhard Meier. Why do we have to be told that it is a
Well,
novel?
remember Santayana's subtitle, The Last Puritan. It says The Last Puritan, and right underneath it, it says a memoir in the form of a novel. So it's the idea of a writer who doesn't want to write about his own life as his own life, but about what it means. And so therefore puts it into these other characters, something like that.
But you translate, I mean, the German edition does say Roman. So,
Yeah, so
Yes,
it does
yes.
say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can trust him.
Burton, what did the contemporaries of his, like Frisch and Bixel, think of him to write? Did they talk about him?
That I don't know. He was also, by the way, Meier was very much struck by Robert Balza, and who indeed makes his books make an appearance in the third book of this series. And I really don't know about that. Peter Handke, of course, gave Meier half of the literary prize that Handke had received because he thought he deserved it. And so I really don't know. I hadn't, in my readings through Frisch and so forth, I haven't come across anything. I don't think Frisch ordinarily talked about other writers. And about Balzer, I really don't know. But of course, the Swiss society, the Swiss German society is a small one. And so certainly these people were aware of each other's existence, I think.
I ask about that. I mean, what is his reputation in readership? I got this from my German copy from the Princeton University Library. I went and searched in files, couldn't find it. Found out that it's in a deposit library. It's one of the things that's been taken off the shelf, and you have to put in a request, and 2 days later you get the book. I confess until this thing here, I'd never heard of this writer. I've heard of Max Frisch and people like that, of course, but what is his reputation, his standing?
Well, it's rather high. I mean, all of my friends in Germany that I asked about this, they'd all knew it, they'd all read it, they all thought very highly of it. So he's certainly known quantity. He also